You know my story, right?
Yeah, so my name's Kelly. I'm Kelly Becker. I am a mother of 2, and I am a lifelong advocate for a whole lot of things, but mostly for survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence, but issues surrounding social justice as well.
Okay, wonderful. And so first question, because this show is based on the intersections of mental health and coffee, I guess. If that caffeine helps with mental health, I suppose. For me, it does. But anyway, so what's your favorite caffeinated beverage?
Okay, so I am a tea person. I'm going to have to go with my green tea.
Yes.
But so I got it down to an art. I had this fantastic tea once at Starbucks, and they took a green tea and they put like the cold foam cream stuff on top of the tea and then dusted it with a little cinnamon, and it had like some vanilla syrup in it, and it was to die for.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing.
And now I replicate them at home.
That's awesome.
Yep.
I love like finding something that I love out there at like a bougie spot like that, where it's going to be pricey if you go and buy it every day, and then finding a way to dupe it.
Yeah.
And with social media nowadays, it's super easy to find the dupes, like for anything common. Like I even saw the Raising Cane sauce dupe, and I want to duplicate that because it's so good.
It is delicious.
It's so good.
I love Raising Canes.
Yes. And so I like all things coffee. We know that. I have it tattooed on myself. So I love all things coffee. But today, so we are at Kelly's house.
Hello.
So Kelly's also my best friend. So we are at her house, and she let me borrow this adorable little coffee glass that is a cactus, if you look closely. And I'm having today, this is Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee, butter pecan flavor, which Kelly bought for me to have here for me as the guest. So I really appreciate it because she knows that a way to my heart is coffee. Yes. So, okay. So I've known you forever and I know your journey. But the next icebreaker question that I have for you is hopefully going to kind of like open up the whole conversation about like workplace mental health, what that means for you, like professionally as an advocate, personally, maybe if you want to go into that. But I'm hoping this question, and I borrowed it from one of my favorite podcasts, the OCD Stories with Stuart Ralph. So a shout out if Stuart's listening. I would like fangirl if you were listening, Stuart. Maybe I'll email it to him. He uses this with his guests. His podcast is about mental health as well, OCD in particular, and I just really love this question, and the answers and the conversation that comes out of it is so authentic. So I'm really excited to ask you this question because in all the conversations that you and I have had on every topic under the sun over the how long? 13 years we've known each other?
It's been
2011. Yeah. Fall of 2011. Yep. And then, so, I don't think we've actually like asked each other this specific question. So if you could pick up the phone and call your 20-year-old self, what would you say to her?
I think I would tell her that like authenticity is the key to your happiness and your success.
Okay.
I think through my professional career, I spent so much of my life trying to fit the mold that I was supposed to fit.
Same.
And show up the way someone else said I was supposed to show up. And masking so many parts of who I really am.
Yes.
That you get to this place of burnout where it's like you can almost not function anymore. And I've discovered the only way to keep that balance of like being healthy and whole and well is to be authentic and to not hide those pieces of you that make you unique.
Right. And to be true to yourself and like what your needs are, because I think, you know, for the listeners out there, many of them probably don't come from the advocacy field like you and I do. So that's how we know each other. Right. You trained me when I was a little baby advocate. And we had some very interesting experiences together. When you work at a crisis center, that tends to be the normal is abnormal. through all that, I think a lot of people that are listening are probably wondering, like, what does it mean to not be authentic to yourself if you're in a job that is inherently serving your personal values? Because, you know, suffice it to say, if you're in the field of working with survivors of violence, you have a value where you are an advocate against those types of violence and against violence in general. And so when you're working at organizations that serve, and you know where I'm going with this, that serve the needs of these vulnerable populations, and that's the work that you're doing, and you're serving your personal mission, how is it that you can fall into this rut of not being authentic and feeling like you have to show up in a different way?
So what I've noticed, especially in our career or our field, is that the folks that tend to like flock to this type of work are typically survivors or co-survivors or have some sort of personal experience.
Yes.
And one of the earliest things I was taught as an advocate is that this situation isn't about you, and to swallow any feeling or emotion that you might have regarding your own circumstances.
I remember that. That was our training and what was in the policies that we had to follow.
Yes. Yeah. And so what that did was it really put you in a place where you couldn't do any of your own healing.
Yes.
And you were helping people, yes, and you were making an impact, but you were doing it to your own detriment.
Yes.
And it's not sustainable. And so what I saw happening was advocates leaving the field left and right with all this knowledge and understanding, who had the ability to help people, and they couldn't stay in the work because they couldn't handle. It's not sustainable mentally for your mental health to be able to do that, especially when you're so deeply impacted by the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had circumstances, and you and I have talked about this, and I think you've had situations as well where with survivors, where I was like leading a support group, or I was talking one-on-one with a survivor. This happened in a couple different settings within the work, where someone would ask me, like, well, how do you know all these things? Or how can you empathize? Because you put into words how I was feeling. Like, has something like this happened to you?
Right.
And the way we were taught was to be like, we didn't have to disclose, which is good, right? Like, you don't want to tell a survivor you have to use that,
of course,
your survivorship in your work. But we did have the option. We could say yes or no, but that was like all we could say.
Right.
We had a script where we were like, yes, I'm a survivor as well, but I've done my healing and I've gone to therapy, and now I'm here to help you. And this is about you. And like, to very intentionally put the ball back in their court. But the way that some survivors saw that, a lot of survivors, was, you're expecting me to be vulnerable with you, and you're expecting me to talk about these things, and you don't trust me enough to talk about your experience.
Yeah, and I think there's a fine line.
Yes.
Because, of course, you know, you're not showing up for someone in the midst of their crisis and telling them all the things about your personal experiences.
Right. That
you really
would be...
don't want to make it about you.
Yes.
But you are a whole human being, and you show up as a whole authentic human being.
Yes.
And that when you do that, when you show up authentically, that's when you're able to do your best work and provide the most help for the people that you're serving.
Absolutely. And there's not a formula or a script that you can apply to every single situation.
Right.
And it's so funny to me, and we were talking about that yesterday evening too, that we can, you know, you and I have both been in the position of training younger advocates, and we were taught in our Train the Trainer training that we had to train them to use their gut instinct in situations, and that was their best tool that they had, which I still 100% agree with. Like, any kind of advocacy, activism, human rights work, you have, your gut is your compass. But then we were also putting these stipulations, like, oh, but here's a script for this circumstance and here's a script for this circumstance. So even the things, these movements that we worked in that are grassroots movements that have like this rich history of women helping women and women just coming together and putting their heads together and throwing something together as it meshed with the social work field, then you end up with all that red tape and all those stipulations, and it can't be as authentic as I think it was originally intended to be back at the beginning of the movement.
Well, and I think like when we first started, it was almost like, well, if you have a moment where you're not great around your own experiences, where you're feeling like the weight of it, you get triggered, something like that, well, then you're not fit for the work is what they tell
Exactly.
you.
It was, or if something, goodness forbid, happens to you.
Yeah.
If you're victimized in some way or re-victimized or however you want to put it, then you're supposed to just quit your job. So like we're all walking around on eggshells like, oh, hope somebody doesn't randomly decide to assault me today because then I won't have a job.
Right.
How traumatizing.
And that's been my experience. Like I've experienced components of domestic violence and sexual assault as an advocate myself.
Yes.
And I think it's scary to think about how many folks are in the field that have those experiences that don't get the help they need because it is a threat to their livelihood, their income, their ability to help the people that they're passionate about helping.
Yes.
And so it's this vicious like cycle that just brings you down into this deep pit of like despair. But you never feel like you can stop because you just want to keep helping. Yes, absolutely. And I had points in the career that I felt the same way, or when I got to the level, and you know, you're in leadership and I've been in leadership in the field. And when I got to the leadership level where I was like more at the executive level and running all the HR pieces and all of that, I had situations with staff where I was told by my superiors that like, okay, well, we have to encourage this staff member to get support, but not here. And it's like, but they meet all the other criteria that all our clients are. Like this happened to them. It happened within our jurisdiction of advocacy. They live within our jurisdiction of advocacy. Like they meet all the criteria to be a client, but they can't be a client because they work here and they can't get support from their coworkers. But they're expected to like trust each other and work together on sensitive issues. Make it make sense. Yes.
Because it doesn't. And that was where I really started to feel like I'm an advocate for life. Like I'm never going to take that hat off, but I started to really think about like my advocacy and what I wanted it to look like.
100%.
Because wearing that like bureaucratic hat, I was being asked to do things within a field that the field itself is 100% in line. Like these were my dream jobs.
Absolutely.
So it's 100% in line with my passions and who I am as a person, and the same for you. But you're being asked to do things that your gut is like,
this is wrong.
This is wrong. And this is now, this organization is not in line with my mission. They may be doing work that's in line with my personal mission and who I am as a person.
And that's why I can go back to like the authenticity piece.
Yes.
Because if you are authentic to yourself, that means like knowing what your values are.
Yes.
Living by those values. And it doesn't matter where you are, what position that you're in.
Yes.
If you are true to yourself and to your values, then
you're going to be happy.
You're going to be,
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that like I'm also coming from an incredible place of privilege in that like I'm going to be okay if I lose a job, I can go get another one.
Right.
I understand that not everybody is financially in a place where it's going to be that okay for them.
Well, and I think, financially, but also I think the privilege lies in the fact that you've learned over the years that your identity isn't entirely wrapped up in what you do for a career.
Right.
Like, just because, like, let's say you got fired from an advocate job at an organization.
Right.
that doesn't mean you're no longer an advocate. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you also have that privilege and that you're educated and you're employable and you have all these years of experience. And so, like, you're going to pick up and on to the next thing.
Absolutely.
Within the field, and it's still going to be in line with your passions. And you don't have to, like, create a whole new career or anything like that. And so I think that's what's really, like, as I research and I teach leadership training specifically on trying to reduce trauma in the workplace, I learn more and more about scientifically and psychologically what that workplace trauma does to a person.
Absolutely.
And so it's a lot like, you know, all we have to do is look at it like advocates. It's a lot like leaving an abusive relationship, because
100%.
That's what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing you don't realize. Like, I know that people say it's just a job, this or that or whatever.
Yeah.
People who go into this line of work, I mean, it's more than a job. It's a life. It's a passion.
Exactly. Yes.
They're doing the same work even when they're not at work. And
right. And so, like, to have that title or to be stripped of the privileges that go with it, because you can't, there are things that you have to be under an agency umbrella to do. So, like, I can't just, without working for an organization, just walk into a courtroom like I used to do and start helping victims.
Right.
Like, that makes no sense.
Exactly.
So I have talked to advocates that have, like, been laid off or just left on their own free will, but if the circumstances were better, they wouldn't have made that decision. They really liked the work they were doing. And that was what hurts the most, is losing the ability and the access to those survivors so that you can help them.
Yeah. And not just the survivors, but access to your own support systems.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I can't tell you how many times I've tried to have a conversation with people about my career or whatever, and they sit here, rape crisis center, and get, like, really uncomfortable and don't want to talk about it. And
exactly. But you can talk to your coworkers.
You can talk to your coworkers.
Well, and that's why you and I are still friends, very close friends after all these years. And we haven't worked at the same organization in years.
Correct.
And we did, like, a small stint, like, halfway in between there, but it's still been years since that. But we still, whenever we have any kind of, like, work issue, or even if it's not work related, but it's advocacy related, like with a friend or personally, we are calling each other
100%,
because I understand how you're looking at every circumstance in your life, because we both identify as advocates. So it's so much more than where you work.
Yeah.
It's a community.
It is 100% a community.
Yeah.
And I know that, like, when I've had to leave jobs in the past, it's very isolating to lose that sense of community.
Yes.
When your work is something that it's so passion driven.
Yes. And you do sometimes, like, because of the politics of all of it, you do lose friends. Yeah. And there are people that, because of the politics, I don't speak to anymore, that I really enjoyed the time that I spent working alongside them, and I still root for them and think they're amazing advocates and hope they're doing well. So yeah, it is, it's really interesting. And, like, my experience was, as long as when I came out of undergrad, I was like, as long as I can work in women's rights, then, like, I'm going to be happy, because I'm going to be doing what I want to do. And I was just so naive. Looking back, I was just so naive.
Well, I think the thing that we don't think about when we're young and, like, looking forward to this career or whatnot is, just because we're there because we have a passion, does not mean that everyone we'll come across will have that same passion.
Exactly.
And yes, maybe you work for a nonprofit and you think, I'm doing good. But also, there are still people behind the scenes that are impacted significantly by the finances, that it's a nonprofit, but decisions are not always made based on the best interests of the people that are being served.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you run the same issue, especially in large nonprofit organizations that have a national or international reach. And this isn't to dog on any nonprofit or anything. There are some great ones out there. But I just had this belief that, like, going into nonprofits, it was going to be a different experience than the corporate environment. And when you realize that the same corporate politics exists when you get in those bigger organizations,
yes.
you know, if it's a small, like few people, very grassroots, community-based organization that's serving a very small population, that's one thing.
Yep.
But when it's branded as one of these bigger national organizations, you are going to have, you know, the ladder is huge, and everybody has a boss, and there's politics, because that's a lot of money, nonprofit or not, to be moving around to not have politics.
It is.
And so that's not to, you know, everybody's in a difficult position and having to wade through that. And I think everybody is blindsided by how much tension can be created.
Yeah. And so, like, because it still tends to take on that corporate structure, I think the setup in general can be kind of exploitive to the people, especially who are passionate about the work. Because, okay, well, we're typically going to be underpaid and understaffed. And so we're working harder and harder to get all the things done.
Yes. And that's why you do get a lot of, like, and you and I have seen it time and time again, where somebody comes straight out of college into the movement. They have this degree. They can get the job. It's their dream job. Just like me. I was like, I want to be in the trenches. I don't want to do leadership. I want to be in the trenches forever doing direct service crisis intervention. So problematic. Like, no one brain can handle that. Like, if I had to quantify, like, if you had to just, like, randomly guesstimate how many survivors you've served, like, how many immediate crisis you've intervened? Hundreds, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't even count. I would have no idea how to...
I would have no idea. Like, I'm picturing, like, files, and I'm like, well, how many files could a drawer hold? And how, you know, because, like, we were about analog system everything back in the day. We were, like, handwriting all our notes. So...
And then count on, like, the co-survivors and stuff that you also...
Yes, yeah. And so, I mean, like, if you think about what we were making to start, like, and we were, like, with a degree, like, if we had gone into, like, more white-collar sector with the degrees we had, we would have been making, like, twice what we were making at the same age. But we were, like... We don't care what we're making. We just want to help people. And that's where that exploitation can happen, because the people that are many, many rungs higher on the ladder, they don't have the same. And they're not seeing the direct service piece every day. So I think that passion can start to... or that compassion maybe can start to, like, fade a little bit. Not intentionally, but when you're not immersed in it, like when you're not seeing the horrific things we were seeing day in and day out, you're distanced from it.
Well, and you kind of have to, that compassion fatigue is real. Because otherwise, like, it's detrimental to your own mental health. You have to be able to, like, somehow shut some of that down, because no one can process that level of, like, pain and trauma and be completely just, like, hunky-dory.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the compassion fatigue is like a self-protection mechanism to maintain your own, like, mental well-being.
Well, and speaking of compassion fatigue and burnout in this field, I think it's important to recognize that, like, we've said the advocate hat is not one you can take off. And I think, like, just to clarify for the listeners, because you and I could talk and we know what we're saying. But to clarify for the listeners, like, just like we've said all along, and we actually would say that in trainings, like, and Deb, one of our former colleagues who was a mentor to both of us in a lot of ways, she said that I always did a really good job at this speech. So she always had me give it when we would have, like, staff meetings and volunteer meetings and things. And I would say, like, you know, just a reminder that, like, you know, not just your affiliation with this organization. Like, a lot of businesses will say, like, just remember, you always represent the company. Like, don't go out and be foolish because everybody knows you work here. Like, obviously there's that, but then there's the, like, layer of, like, you work for a social justice organization. You are advocating for these things. And we ran into issues where we had, like, when you and I were both supervisors, where we were like, girl, like, we need to talk because, like, this is crazy. But where people were, like, their personal activities were, like, against what we stood for.
Right.
And so it's like, you're not political, but you do stand for policy issues.
Right.
And social issues. Like, I don't care how you vote, but I do care how you represent the issues that we're fighting on one side.
Yeah, 100%.
To the public. And so with that, I feel like, me personally, and I'm interested to know your story, like, how much of like the many times you've experienced burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, was that largely contributed to by the fact that like the job never ended? Like, you literally can never take a break from rape culture.
No, you can't. I mean, you can't turn on the television. You can't step out the door without seeing it in your face somewhere.
Yes.
So yeah, you're always an advocate.
Yeah. And it's like a personality type you're born with in some ways. Like, that you can't shut up when people are talking nonsense.
100%. Talk to my parents. I was like 5 years old arguing with like racist old uncle
adults. Yeah. That's how I was too. Like, I've yelled at the elder relatives at the dinner table for saying something inappropriate or whatever. And I was labeled a curious child, which was like a negative thing. Like, because I was like, oh, you're telling me I have to believe this, or you're telling me the world is this way? Why?
Right.
Why? Like, give me the receipts.
Right.
I was always asking for the receipts. And so, and I know you and I especially are the type, because I've been in public with you on many, many occasions in many different settings, social, professional, and otherwise. And I mean, I've been in professional settings where like we've gone toe to toe, and like we just look at each other anymore, and it's like, yeah, I got your back. Like, let's go. But like, like, It is exhausting, because like I might just want to go have a drink and not have some jerk make some stupid comment and then have to like recite statistics for the next 2 hours.
Well, and I think for me, part of the hardest part of it was like, often the things that I was hearing or encountering that were most problematic and most harmful were coming from like my own family and people that were close to me.
Yes.
And so you deal with it at work. You deal with it anytime you step out of your house. You deal with it at home.
Yes.
It's everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, like, you have to be able to find a place that is, like, safe and you can be your full, authentic self.
Yes.
To be able to be successful.
Yes.
And to have longevity in work like this.
Yes. Absolutely.
And it's a failure on like business, like on leadership standpoint, if we're not providing kind of that foundation for how that can be done. Mm-hmm. Because then all we're doing is we're pushing knowledgeable, talented people out of the field.
Yes.
And pushing knowledge out of the field that could be helping more people.
Absolutely.
And so you get all these fresh young folks that are trying to learn on their own. They don't have this like generational knowledge to learn from.
Absolutely.
Because it's not sustainable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, with authenticity being your main message to your younger self, which I agree, like my words to my younger self would probably be something along those lines as well. Can you give an example, and you can go into as much or as little detail, you can keep things confidential, but can you give an example of a time in the field, since this has been in some way, shape, or form your career, for your entire career, like, can you give an example of a time when you really felt like, okay, like this environment or this situation, like I have to make some kind of a change because it was like the straw that broke the camel's back? You were like, I am not me, or I'm being asked to be someone who's not me.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know how to pick just one of those moments. I feel like there have been so many throughout my career.
Okay.
I think when I was younger, working as an advocate, there were circumstances that I would come across. I'm thinking back to like one particular situation where a survivor came to me, and I very much wanted to advocate for this person, and was told by someone in leadership that, well, this person's a liar and you don't know them like I do, and blah, 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 and you shouldn't be we're just going to like not support this person.
Wow.
And as an advocate, like, no.
That's counter to what we're taught entirely. You always believe survivors, and it's a free service. Yeah. And if you want...
And you're entitled to the service. So I don't really care what anyone else thinks about that survivor's honesty or whatnot. My job is to advocate.
Yes. And trauma is relative.
Yeah.
Like, you know, how many people did we work with that they were survivors of their own mental health condition?
100%.
And they would call and they would have absurd circumstances, like literally, physically, scientifically impossible things that they would say, like involving perpetrators being inanimate objects and things like that. But we still provided services. Yeah. Obviously, the services and the referrals that we're going to make based on our assessment is going to be a little bit different. But this person really thinks this happened.
Right.
And so we're meeting them where they're at. So it's just like, I know the situation you're talking about. I was there. I heard through the walls, all of that. But it was like, it's to this day, it's been like almost a decade, and it shocks me.
Yeah.
It shocks me.
So I think the authenticity piece there for me was like, okay, this is the person that, like, runs our agency, and, like, I'm going toe-to-toe with my boss's boss.
Exactly.
Yes. And as an advocate, like, my entire role here is to support the survivor.
Like,
but
they hired me to do this,
but I'm being told that I can't do
the job I was hired to do.
Right, and so I had to make a choice, right?
Yeah.
I had to, like, do I comply here and not provide the services that I know I need to be providing to this person? Or do I risk my career? And do I do what's right here? And I'm like, that's where the authenticity piece came in for me.
Yes.
Because I don't think my career could have continued had I not
served that
survivor. I don't think mentally I would have gotten through that.
Yeah, and you did serve the survivor.
And
that was the decision you made, because I remember I went to court one day when you couldn't be there. So we both served that survivor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, and that all the authenticity, the values that you hold, it all ties back to knowing yourself, knowing your values, and standing true to that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Because regardless, like, I can live with myself helping someone and losing a job. I can't live with myself keeping that job and watching someone else get hurt at my, I can't handle protecting myself at someone else's expense.
Yep. I had a very similar situation at the same place when we were both working there together, where I provided a service that the referral that the survivor requested. I followed everything from, like, my advocacy, like, did what the survivor needed, met the need, did all of that. There was some red tape and some things with funders and bureaucratically that could maybe be, maybe some people wouldn't be happy with how I served that survivor. I'm just going to leave it at that. Or with the referral that I made. But I know I did my job and that it was in the best interest. And I came home from work that day, and it was a Friday. So, like, I couldn't even debrief with our boss or anything like that. And I told my husband, like, I may lose my job over what just happened. And he just, like, he had no information, no context. And he was like, at the end of the day, did you serve that client the way that you feel they needed to be served? Did you meet their needs? And would you have done the same thing over again if you were in the same situation? I said, absolutely. And he said, then we'll deal with it.
Yep.
Because that was one of those that in that moment I knew, like, I may be royally screwed here, but this person is literally telling me this, and this is what I need from you. That, and that were all within my wheelhouse. And that's what was provided.
100%.
And if I did not lose my job, everything worked out. But, like, had it not, I would still be to this day proud of how I, pleased with how I handled that situation.
Right. And I give my dad so much credit for kind of instilling some of those thoughts into my mind. So when I was a young girl, he had a circumstance where he was put in a position of like in a leadership role at work where he had to make some choices about helping someone who came to report something to him versus, potentially impacting his career. And he did end up losing a career around this.
Yeah.
And, but like, I know that the conversation he came home and had with my mom was like, if this, like, I can't not do the right thing here because like, how do I look my children in the face and say that I'm not like
that I chose like money or my job or my status, my title over doing the right thing for people.
So I remember my dad losing his job as a kid, or when I was a kid, but still being so incredibly proud of him. And
so he was really transparent with you guys as to what happened and why that was happening.
He was.
Yeah.
And so like I said, the authenticity piece, my dad has been a model of that.
That's
my
amazing.
Entire life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's so good and I think like a lot of people don't have that modeled for them.
Right.
Like a lot of people grew up and that was somewhat my experience, but I know others that it was even more so that they grew up in working class families and they saw their parents get treated like absolute crap by their supervisors or work in jobs where they never had any growth potential. Yeah. Their triumphs were never recognized. They were never considered for raises. It was just like work your bum off and not for like low pay and just be grateful that you have a job. Yes. And so a lot of people, that's still their mentality.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
You dust it off, get yourself into the office and work longer and longer hours and do more and more.
Yes.
And not make more money, of course.
Right.
And yeah, it's wild, the mindset.
Can you give an example of a time when like you really like felt that mindset, like where you like maybe you had an expectation of a promotion or a raise or something and like it was just viewed so counter to what you expected it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember one job that I was in, and they were very good on the surface about being like big on, self-care is important. Take care of yourself.
Even they have like some self-care time built into the PTO.
There was a lot of things like that were like in practice or like in theory were really great.
On paper, they were doing all this trauma-informed leadership.
Right.
Yeah.
But then I remember I had like a scheduled trip with my family.
Yes.
And something came up business-wise that was a little stressful for folks. And like, I remember being just really put down and like...
For leaving during that time.
For actually taking my planned vacation when literally there was nothing I could have done to make
it. It was planned way before. You could have never foreseen. It's the crisis field. You could have never foreseen that situation.
There's always going to be a crisis.
Yes.
And... like I was viewed as like a selfish employee and not willing to contribute to the team because I took my family vacation.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that like people that are in the corporate world that are experiencing that and they're like, yeah, that's par for the course. I don't think they realize that happens in like the social services fields as well. And it does a lot.
And so this isn't like, I'm not like a CEO of some company where I have all this, like, this is just, a regular job.
That, like, things are going to happen. Like, what if it had been an emergency, a family emergency? Right. You would have had to take that time. Yeah.
And I do think it's really important in terms of, like, our overall mental health and well-being. I don't think our work should be the priority.
No.
I think our families are, our mental health, our physical health.
I think regardless of the field.
Yeah, regardless.
Because, and we know, productivity, I don't really like that word because it's a white supremacist construct. And
absolutely.
It's it's meant to put numbers above people. And we know all that. But like but output increases when people feel that their well-being is prioritized. They are less likely to take unexpected time off. They are less likely, you have less turnover. So you're not like, it is extremely expensive to rehire. It is extremely expensive for companies to hire, and nonprofits and organizations. And so like, the more we realize, and that's why I'm doing this with this platform as well as my consulting, like the more we realize that like when people are treated well, they stay and they do good work.
They do.
And you would think that that would be something that the social services field has embraced already. But I really feel like it's just a societal issue that we have to, across the board, across industries, across for-profit, nonprofit, government, whatever level you're at, this has to exist. 100%. From everything from like working poor job. First of all, something called working poor shouldn't exist, but that's another soapbox. Right. But you know, from all levels, from fast food to like high executive suites in New York, everyone should be treated like they matter and that they have a life outside of their
100%.
job. Yeah.
Because it's a job. At the end of the day, it's a job.
Right. Like, we all work to survive.
If I go to my job on Monday and I get in a car accident and die on the way there, they will have me replaced so fast.
Yeah.
But my family won't.
Right.
And so, you know, the people that are important to me in my life are not going to be able to replace me so easily. And so I think just remembering that, like, yes, it's a job. Mm-hmm. And it is not the most important thing in life.
Well, and I love that, like, in your introduction, you said your name, which is who you are, and then that you are a mom. Yep. Because you're reprioritizing and taking that over, because how many people in their introductions are like, I'm so-and-so, and I'm the CEO of this company, or I'm so-and-so, and I'm the, you know, whatever of this organization, when, like, I'm here to talk to you, not Kelly, the professional advocate.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I love that. And that's something that like I'm going to take a mental note of too, because I've always prioritized so much like, I'm working in this field, so I'm a this, and I'm working here, so I'm a this. And it's like, no, like I'm a human that happens to do this. Right. And makes money doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like even in my introduction as well, like talking about the work that I do, I didn't mention where I work.
Right.
I mentioned the type of work because it doesn't matter where I am.
Right. You are doing that.
I am an advocate. Yes. That's who I am.
Yes.
And so whether I'm working for a bank or a rape crisis center or wherever I'm at, I will always be an advocate in some capacity.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that's actually a great place to like, cool. Okay. Yay.
You know my story, right?